My name is Helen Parker. I'm 62 years old, a wife of nearly 4 decades, and for most of my life, I believed I had everything I needed: stability, comfort, a good man by my side. But all it took was one unexpected conversation with my husband's boss to unravel everything I thought I knew. It wasn't scandalous. He didn't flirt. He simply said 8 words that shook me to my core. "You deserve to be seen, Helen. Truly seen." And from that moment, my quiet, predictable life began to crack, revealing truths I hadn't dared to face until now. I had grown used to the quiet rhythm of my days. Mornings in the garden, the scent of roses clinging to my fingertips, afternoons with a warm cup of tea and a good mystery novel, and evenings by my husband Tom's side, recalling stories from a life we had built together brick by brick. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was a stable one. Predictable. Safe. At least, it was, until that evening at the gala. Tom had worked at the same company for over 35 years. A man of discipline and structure, he had risen from a junior analyst to an executive, all while rarely missing a day of work. He prided himself on consistency, on being a man people could rely on. I used to find that admirable. Maybe I still did. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling included in that journey. I had become the shadow that moved beside him, present but unacknowledged. When he told me about the upcoming company gala, I didn't want to go. "They expect spouses to attend," Tom said without looking up from his laptop. "It's at the Hyatt downtown." Black tie. I stared at him for a moment, waiting for some tenderness in his tone, a smile, an invitation. None came, just the cold tap of his fingers on the keys. "I suppose I'll wear the navy dress," I murmured. "Perfect," he replied, already miles away in some spreadsheet. That Saturday, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the modest neckline of that navy blue dress. It still fit, though not the way it used to. My auburn hair, now streaked with silver, was swept back into a soft bun. I added a touch of blush to my cheeks, a dab of lipstick. I didn't know who I was trying to impress. Tom rarely looked at me anymore, not really. But something inside me stirred that evening. A quiet, desperate hope that maybe tonight, he'd see me again. The hotel was stunning. Glittering chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light. Waiters in crisp white shirts floated past with champagne flutes. A jazz quartet played in the corner, their music melting into the low murmur of conversation and laughter. I clung to Tom's arm as we walked in, but it wasn't long before he peeled away, swallowed by a sea of colleagues, back slaps, and business talk. And just like that, I was alone. I drifted toward a group of wives and partners, smiling politely, sipping sparkling water, pretending to listen. I was used to this part, filling in the background while Tom played the lead. I told myself I didn't mind. I had told myself that for years. Then I heard his voice. "Helen," a deep baritone said. "May I have a moment?" I turned and saw Gerald Stone, Tom's boss. A tall man with silver hair, sharp features, and the kind of calm confidence that didn't need to announce itself. I had met him before, always briefly, always cordially. But he'd never spoken to me like this. Direct. Intentional. "Of course," I replied, caught off guard but curious. He led me through a side corridor, away from the music and the crowd, and into a private lounge. The room was warm, dimly lit, with leather chairs and a quiet fireplace flickering in the corner. I felt my heart thrum in my chest. Not with fear, but with something unnameable. Anticipation, maybe. Or dread. "Please," he gestured to the chair across from him. I sat, smoothing my dress over my knees. "Is everything all right?" Gerald looked at me with a strange mixture of sympathy and intensity. "It's about Tom." My spine straightened. "Has something happened?" He shook his head slowly. "No, nothing like that. But there's something I think you need to hear." I felt a cold prickle climb up the back of my neck. I had no idea what he was about to say, but instinctively, I knew it would change everything. "I've known Tom a long time," Gerald began. "I've watched him build his career, lead his team, and speak proudly of his wife. You." I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "But," he continued, his voice softer now, "I've also watched something else. Something that's troubled me for years." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. Then he leaned in. "He doesn't appreciate you the way he should." The air left my lungs in one sharp exhale. I blinked at him, confused, maybe even offended. "I'm sorry," I managed, my voice small. Gerald held my gaze. You stand beside him at every event, Helen. You smile. You support. You make it all look so easy. But when was the last time he looked at you? Really looked at you? As the remarkable woman you are? I couldn't speak. I didn't know how. I'm sorry if this is too forward, he added, backing off slightly. But I couldn't keep quiet anymore. You deserve to be seen. Those words. You deserve to be seen. They sank into me like stones into water, rippling through layers I had long buried beneath routine, loyalty, and silence. I sat there, frozen, the fireplace casting shadows across the walls as if the room itself understood the weight of what had just been said. And deep down, beneath the initial wave of disbelief, I knew he was right. I walked back into the ballroom like I was wading through a dream, unsteady, disoriented, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The music hadn't changed. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the whirl of conversation, it was all still there, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. But for me, something had changed. Gerald's words played over and over in my mind, louder than the jazz band, louder than my own thoughts. You deserve to be seen. I spotted Tom exactly where I'd left him, in the center of a small crowd of men in tuxedos, his hands animated as he spoke, his smile wide and confident. His eyes never searched for me. Not once. I watched him from a distance, wondering how many times I'd done this exact thing, stood quietly at the edge of his life while he shined. I waited. Eventually, he glanced around, his eyes landing on me. There was no warmth in them. No spark of recognition or appreciation. Just a small nod, the kind you give a stranger at a bus stop. Then he turned back to his conversation. I smiled weakly at no one in particular and reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray. I didn't even like champagne. It was too dry, too sharp. But I needed anything to steady my nerves. The ride home was quiet. We barely spoke. Tom was focused on the road, his fingers tied around the steering wheel. I stared out the window, watching the lights of the city blur into streaks of gold and red. His voice finally broke the silence, but it felt mechanical, like a button he pressed out of habit. Did you have a good time tonight? The question hung in the air, thin and lifeless. It was interesting, I said. He nodded. I was never leaving the road. Good, good. And that was it. No follow-up. No curiosity. No asking what I meant by interesting. Just silence again, the kind that settled between us like dust, thick, undisturbed, and ignored for too long. When we got home, Tom went through his usual motions. Jacket off. Shoes by the door. Keys on the counter. Then straight to his office, his sanctuary. I could hear the soft click of his mouse, the low hum of his computer fan, the tapping of keys. I stood in the kitchen, alone with the echo of his absence. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I didn't even know what I was feeling. Maybe that was the scariest part. I had spent so many years knowing my place, knowing my purpose. But now, there was a question I couldn't ignore. When had I disappeared? I walked slowly down the hallway to our bedroom. As I passed the mirror, I stopped. For a long time, I just stared. My reflection looked back at me, tired and worn but not broken. My auburn hair had faded, streaked now with silver threads. My face bore the lines of decades lived, some joy, some pain, but my eyes, they hadn't changed. They still held a flicker of the woman I used to be. The woman who once danced barefoot in the kitchen, who laughed so hard she cried, who dreamed of Italy and warm croissants by the sea. The woman Tom had fallen in love with. Had she been buried under routine and quiet sacrifice? Or had she simply disappeared? I pressed my fingers to the mirror's surface, as if trying to touch something long lost. But my skin only met cold glass. The next morning, Tom left early. He kissed my cheek and muttered, "Big meeting today. I'll be home late." I nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. As the door closed behind him, I stood in the doorway for a moment, wrapped in silence. Normally, I would have started my day, laundry, garden, groceries, the usual pattern that kept things moving, kept things normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. I made myself a cup of coffee, but it grew cold in my hands. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. I wandered from room to room like a ghost in my own home. Gerald's voice returned, soft but firm. "You deserve to be seen." And suddenly, before I could second-guess myself, I picked up the phone. I stared at his name in my contacts, Gerald Stone. It felt ridiculous. It felt bold. It felt necessary. He answered on the second ring. "Helen?" His voice held surprise, but also something else. Something warmer. Softer. I took a breath. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" There was a pause. Then, of course, I hung up and sat for a moment, the phone still in my hand, my heart racing. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I had called. But I knew this much. A seed had been planted. And whether I wanted it to or not, it had already started to grow. The cafe sat just off the lakeshore, nestled between a bookstore and a florist shop, both of which I'd passed dozens of times over the years without ever stepping inside. It was the kind of place people walk past without a second thought, but today, it felt like a crossroads. A quiet, modest corner of the world where lives quietly shifted course. Gerald was already there when I arrived, seated at a small table near the window, nursing a cup of black coffee. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, those sharp, discerning eyes, lifted the moment I stepped through the door, as if he'd been waiting longer than the clock suggested. "Helen," he said, rising slightly from his seat. "I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you." I forced a smile, trying to steady my nerves. Neither was I. The waitress took our order, coffee for me, cream and sugar, and a shared plate of fresh pastries we both ignored. I stirred my cup absent-mindedly, watching the cream spiral through the dark liquid. "I've been thinking about what you said," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Gerald leaned in, resting his forearms on the table, and I looked out the window. The wind carried orange and yellow leaves in lazy circles. The world outside felt too alive for how still I felt inside. "You were right." He said nothing, just nodded, letting me speak. "I don't regret my life," I continued. "I've built something real with Tom. Decades of partnership, a home, memories. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to want something just for me." Gerald studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "And now?" I swallowed hard. "Now? I don't know." He smiled, but it was laced with something gentle and sad. "You don't have to have all the answers today." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe I wasn't standing on the edge of something irreversible. But even in that small cafe, surrounded by the smell of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon, I could feel the ground shifting under me. I spent so many years making sure Tom's world ran smoothly. I said, my voice gaining strength. His schedule, his meals, his routines, everything was built to support his success. I thought that's what love was. "And it is," Gerald said. "But it's not all it should be." That truth hit deeper than I expected. When I got home later that afternoon, the house felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was me, now aware of the emptiness I used to overlook. I wandered into the bedroom, intending to change, but paused as I caught my reflection again in the mirror. There I was, standing in the soft afternoon light, the coffee shop scent still lingering on my clothes. The face staring back wasn't unfamiliar, but it wasn't entirely known to me either. I stepped closer, studying every detail. 62. Silver hair, lines around the eyes and mouth, the echoes of laughter, sorrow, and time. But there was more than that. In my eyes, I saw something deeper. Loneliness, yes, but something else too. A question, a hunger, a woman still waiting to be chosen, even if now, it had to be by herself. I thought about the Helen I used to be, the girl who danced to Fleetwood Mac in the kitchen, the woman who once painted landscapes in the garage while the kids napped, the young wife who stayed up late dreaming of weekend getaways with Tom. Where had she gone? Was she buried beneath routine and responsibility? Had she been lost in the background of Tom's life? Or had I quietly let her slip away without noticing? I touched my cheek gently, surprised to feel the heat of unshed tears there. I hadn't even realized I was crying. That night, when Tom returned, it was like nothing had changed. He walked in, loosened his tie, set his briefcase on the counter, and sighed. "Long day," he muttered. "I'm exhausted." I stood in the kitchen, watching him move about like a man on autopilot. He didn't see the shift in my posture. He didn't ask how my day had gone. He didn't notice the silence hanging between us like a curtain. We were living parallel lives under the same roof. As he disappeared into his office again, I remained frozen in place, hands resting on the edge of the counter. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I could hear the hum of his computer starting up again. Something inside me whispered, "This isn't enough." I walked down the hallway, back to the mirror, the same one from the night before. This time, I didn't flinch when I looked into it. "I see you," I whispered to the woman in the glass. And for the first time in years, she looked back. The next morning arrived dressed in gray. Heavy clouds loomed above the house, and a soft drizzle tapped against the windows like an old memory I couldn't quite place. Tom was already in a rush. He always was on big client days. He kissed me on the cheek, the way someone might press a button on a vending machine, automatic and without thought. "I'll be home late," he said, reaching for his briefcase. "Important pitch this afternoon." "Of course," I replied, managing a weak smile. "Be safe." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Silence wrapped around the house like a heavy coat. I stood in the entryway for a moment, clutching my coffee cup, unsure what to do with myself. Normally, I'd have a list, errands to run, laundry to fold, garden tools to clean, but I couldn't bring myself to care about any of it. Instead, I wandered from room to room like a woman trying to remember why she came home. The silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was accusatory, loud, restless. I found myself staring at the phone on the kitchen counter. My fingers hovered above it, trembling just slightly. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know what I hoped to gain. All I knew was that I couldn't go another day pretending nothing inside me had shifted. I scrolled to Gerald's name. My thumb paused over the call button. I hesitated. Then I pressed it. He answered after 2 rings. "Helen." His voice was calm, familiar, and it unraveled something in me I didn't know I was holding together. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" I asked, my voice low but steady. There was a pause, short, but enough for my heart to race. Then he said softly, "Of course." An hour later, I was back at the same lakeside cafe, seated across from him once more. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the leaves against the windows, but inside it was warm, safe, in a way that had nothing to do with walls or coffee. "I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you again," he said, folding his hands in front of him. Neither was I. The same waitress brought us our drinks, and again, we left the pastries untouched. "I've been thinking," I said, staring down at the swirls of cream in my cup. "About what you said. About being seen." He didn't interrupt. He waited. "I don't regret my marriage," I continued, carefully choosing each word. "Tom and I have built a life together. It's been full of support, routine, memories. But I don't think that's enough anymore." Gerald's brow furrowed gently. "Not enough." I looked up at him, really looked. Somewhere along the way, I think I forgot what it felt like to want something. Not for the house, not for Tom, not for our image, but for me. I've spent decades taking care of everyone else. I don't even know who I am outside of that. He leaned forward slightly, voice low and sincere. "Then maybe it's time to find out." That sentence pierced me more deeply than I expected. Not because it was dramatic or romantic, but because it was true and terrifying. "You make it sound so simple," I whispered. "It's not," he said, "but it's necessary." The words hung between us, heavy like the storm clouds outside. For a moment, all I could hear was the murmur of the cafe, the soft clinking of cups, the scratch of pencils from an old man sketching by the window. I closed my eyes briefly, letting his words settle. I had spent so many years on autopilot, making dinner, keeping calendars, folding shirts the exact way Tom liked them, because that was what a good wife did. But somewhere in that dedication, I had erased myself. "I don't want to leave him," I said quietly, more to myself than to Gerald. "I'm not asking you to," he replied gently. "I just want you to remember that you exist, that you have wants, that you're still a woman with needs, with dreams, with a soul." I blinked back sudden tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of being understood. When I left the cafe that day, the rain had stopped, though the sky remained overcast. I walked slowly back to my car, feeling as though I had just emerged from underwater. I didn't have a new plan. I hadn't made a decision. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt awake. That night, Tom came home late, just like he said he would. He looked tired, worn down. He loosened his tie, muttered something about a difficult client, then made his way to his office without asking how my day had been. I watched him disappear behind that familiar door. And for the first time, I didn't follow him with a tray of tea or a plate of food. I just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of his isolation, and finally realizing that mine had been louder all along. The next morning, the sky broke open with sunlight. It poured through the windows as if the universe was mocking me. Too bright, too cheerful, too normal. I stood at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, watching the bubbles pop one by one, thinking about how long I had gone without questioning the stillness in my life. Until now. Tom was already gone. No goodbye kiss this time. Just a scribbled note on the counter. Big meeting again. Late dinner. Tea. I stared at the note longer than necessary, then crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. The truth was, nothing had changed in his world. But in mine, the shift was seismic. I spent the morning in a strange kind of motion, folding towels I didn't care about, organizing drawers I hadn't touched in years, dusting corners that hadn't bothered me until today. Every task felt mechanical, like my body was acting out a routine my heart no longer belonged to. By mid-afternoon, I stopped pretending. I sat down at the kitchen table, that quiet center of our home where so many decisions had once been made together, and waited. I didn't know exactly what I would say, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. When Tom walked through the door that evening, I was already sitting there, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea, eyes fixed on the spot just behind his shoulder. He looked surprised to see me waiting. "Hey," he said, setting down his briefcase. "Everything okay?" "Long day," I asked, my voice calm. He rubbed his neck. "Exhausting. The client was, well, never mind. You wouldn't care about the details." He moved to walk past me, but I stopped him with a quiet, "Tom, can we talk?" He paused, his back still half turned. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me, maybe for the first time in weeks. Months. Years. "About what?" he asked, cautious now. "About us." He furrowed his brow. "What about us?" I took a breath, feeling my heart start to pound. "I feel invisible, Tom." He blinked, caught off guard. "What?" I looked at him fully now, not as the man I'd supported for 4 decades, not as the partner I'd stood beside through promotions, funerals, anniversaries, but as someone who had slowly let herself vanish. "I feel like I've spent years being the woman behind the curtain," I said, my voice shaking. "The one who makes the house run, who remembers birthdays, who folds your shirts the way you like, who smiles at events while you work the room. And I've loved you, Tom. I still do. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen." He sat down across from me slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. "Helen, I didn't know you felt that way. Did you ever wonder?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. That silence said more than words could. "I guess I thought everything was fine," he finally muttered. "That's the problem," I replied. "We both thought that. We stopped checking in. We stopped asking each other what we needed, what we missed, what we hoped for. We just existed." His eyes dropped to the table. I could tell he didn't know what to do with this version of me. The one who wasn't pouring coffee and nodding. The one who was speaking plainly, emotionally, without the safety net of routine. "So what are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying I need to start living again," I said. He looked up sharply. "Are you leaving me?" The words hung between us like smoke. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't decided anything yet. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep fading further and further into the background of my own life." He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. And in that moment, I saw something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there in years. Fear. Real, human fear. Not about losing control. Not about appearances. But about losing me. "I never meant to make you feel this way," he said. "You're right. I've taken you for granted. I got so used to us being solid, steady. But we haven't been connected, Tom. Steady is not the same as alive." He nodded slowly, still stunned. We sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. For the first time in decades, it felt like we were finally standing on the edge of something honest, something real. Maybe we had a chance to fix this. Maybe we didn't. But for the first time in years, I had said the thing that mattered most. I was no longer invisible. The next few days passed in a strange haze, as though the world around me had continued turning, but something inside me had stopped. I went through the motions, meals, errands, small talk with neighbors, but I felt detached, like I was observing my own life from behind glass. Tom had changed, slightly. He was quieter, more attentive. He brought me flowers one afternoon, carnations, my least favorite, though I didn't correct him. He lingered longer in conversation, asked how I was feeling, kissed my forehead instead of the air beside it. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. It felt like he was trying to fix a house by repainting the walls, when the foundation underneath was already cracked. The night after our conversation, I lay awake long after Tom had fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, his body curled toward his side of the bed, as always. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything I hadn't said. Who am I outside of this marriage? What have I been ignoring in myself just to keep everything from falling apart? The questions weren't new, but they had taken on a different weight now. They pressed against my chest like something urgent, something alive. By morning, I felt like I was suffocating. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a drive. No destination, no list, no obligation. Just my keys, my coat, and a growing ache I couldn't ignore any longer. I ended up near the lake, where the cafe sat nestled in its familiar place, as though it had been waiting for me. I didn't text Gerald. I didn't need to. I just went in, ordered a coffee, and sat at the same table by the window. I watched the wind stir the leaves outside, watched couples walk by, hand in hand, heads bent toward each other with shared laughter. I wasn't envious. I wasn't sad. I was just aware of what I'd been missing. I didn't even hear the door until his voice caught in the air behind me. You came back. I turned to see Gerald standing just inside the cafe, his coat still damp from the misty drizzle outside. There was something in his expression, surprise, yes, but also understanding. I didn't plan to, I admitted. I just ended up here. He smiled gently and gestured toward the seat across from me. May I? I nodded, and he sat down without another word. For a moment, we just drank our coffee in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like a kind of quiet sanctuary. I talked to Tom, I finally said. I told him how I've been feeling. About being invisible. Gerald's eyes met mine. How did he take it? He was stunned, hurt, maybe afraid. But I don't think he fully understands what I've lost. What have you lost, Helen? I looked at him, really looked. Not as Tom's boss. Not as a man who had simply said something kind. But as someone who had seen me, fully, when no one else had. I've lost myself, I said. In being everything for everyone else. I forgot how to want something just for me. Gerald nodded slowly. And now? I hesitated. The answer sat just behind my ribs, trembling like a leaf. Now? I want more. I whispered. Not more things. Not more attention. Just more life. More moments that feel like mine. His expression didn't change, but something in his gaze deepened. You're allowed to want that. You always have been. I swallowed hard. It sounds selfish when I say it out loud. It's not selfish, he said firmly. It's human. The tears came before I could stop them. Quiet, uninvited, but cleansing. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. I spent 40 years putting everyone else first. I said, Tom, the kids, the house, the schedule. I was the reliable one, the stable one, the one who never made waves. And now I don't want to be a ghost in my own story. We sat there, the noise of the world fading beyond the cafe glass. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I needed to apologize for needing something more than survival. I looked at Gerald and saw the warmth in his eyes. Not desire, not pity, but respect. And that, more than anything, made me feel alive again. When I left the cafe, the clouds had parted just slightly, letting through a sliver of sun. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me I still had a choice. That evening, I returned home to the smell of takeout. Tom had ordered from my favorite Thai place, Pad Cew, extra broccoli, no egg. He set the table, even lit a candle, and I could see the effort in his eyes. He was trying, but it felt too late for gestures that skimmed the surface. I sat across from him, picking at my food while he talked about the client he landed that afternoon. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, but inside, I felt like I was watching a play I'd seen too many times. The script hadn't changed, only I had. When the plates were cleared, and the silence stretched long enough to feel like a question, I spoke. Tom, I need to talk to you again. He looked up sharply, as if bracing for impact. Helen, is this about the other night? No, I said softly. It's about every night. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I've been trying, haven't I? I've made time. I've asked about your day. Look, I know I haven't been perfect. But I'm here. I'm trying to fix this. I nodded slowly. I know you are. But this isn't something you can fix in a week with takeout and flowers. He looked stung, but I didn't stop. This isn't about dinners or checking in with me. It's about the years we spent side by side, but never really together. It's about how I shrunk myself to fit your world and never realized how small I'd become. He looked away. I never asked you to shrink. No, I said. You didn't. But you also never noticed that I did. Silence. Heavy, aching silence. Then he said it. The question I knew would come. Is there someone else? It hit like a slap. Not because it was accusatory, but because it showed how far we had drifted. That the only explanation he could imagine for me reclaiming myself was another man. There's no affair, Tom, I said firmly. There's no secret lover. But there is someone who saw me when I didn't know I'd disappeared. He stiffened. Gerald. I met his eyes. Yes, but it's not what you think. He didn't flirt with me. He didn't make promises. He simply noticed. He told me I deserved to be seen, and for the first time in decades, I believed it. Tom's jaw clenched, his pride taking over. So now what? You just walk away because someone else made you feel important for 5 minutes. I stood, slowly, my chair scraping back against the floor. No, Tom. I'm standing here because for 40 years, I forgot I was allowed to feel important at all. He stood too. So what are you saying? That this is over? I took a long breath. My heart was racing, but my voice came out calm. Clear. I don't know what the future holds. I'm not making threats or ultimatums. I'm telling you that something inside me has woken up, and I can't put it back to sleep. He looked at me. Really looked, but I wasn't sure he saw me yet. Not fully. Not the way Gerald had. Not the way I was beginning to see myself. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. I stepped closer, reaching for his hand. Then don't. But know that staying with me means really seeing me. It means letting go of comfort and confronting everything we've been avoiding for years. His eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I married. The one who used to hold my face in his hands and whisper that I was his whole world. Can we start over? He asked. I shook my head gently. We can't start over. But maybe we can start from here. He nodded slowly, like a man waking up from a long sleep. That night, we didn't retreat into separate corners of the house. We sat together on the couch in silence. No TV, no distractions, just two people in the quiet, trying to remember how to hold each other without losing themselves. And as I rested my head on his shoulder, I knew the journey wasn't over. But for the first time, we were walking into it with our eyes open. The days that followed were filled with a cautious kind of quiet. Not the cold, distant silence that had haunted our home for years, but the tender hush of two people learning how to breathe beside each other again. Everything felt fragile, like walking across glass. One wrong step, and it might all shatter. Tom tried. I could see it in the smallest things, how he paused before retreating to his office, how he touched my hand absent-mindedly while passing by, how he asked questions and waited for the answers. But even with his efforts, I knew something had changed too deeply inside me to pretend everything was fine again. I was no longer willing to be a passenger in my own life. One night, as we sat on the porch beneath a pale moon, the air heavy with the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke, I turned to him. I don't want to go back to the way things were, I said quietly. Tom looked at me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. I don't either, he admitted. But I don't know how to do this. How to fix us. I took a breath. Maybe it's not about fixing anything. Maybe it's about finding out who we are now. Separately. And then, seeing if we still make sense together. His brow creased. Are you saying you want space? I'm saying I want truth, I replied. No more autopilot. No more assumptions. I need to know who I am without the title of wife defining everything about me. He looked down, rubbing his hands together. I'm scared, Helen. So am I. That fear wasn't something to run from anymore. It was a sign we were finally facing the reality we'd ignored for so long. And I knew then that no matter where the road led, I couldn't go back to the version of me that had spent decades disappearing in the name of loyalty. The next morning, I packed a small overnight bag. Not to leave permanently, but to breathe, to think, to sit with myself and feel what it meant to simply be Helen again. Tom watched from the front steps as I placed the bag in the passenger seat. Where will you go? He asked. Somewhere quiet. By the lake. Just for a few days. He nodded, slowly. Will you come back? I walked over to him, placed my hand gently on his cheek. I don't know what happens next, Tom. But I promise I'm not running. I'm choosing. And that's something I haven't done for myself in a very long time. His eyes glistened. He pulled me into a hug, firm, warm, desperate in the way that says please don't disappear. I see you now, he whispered into my hair. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I hope you keep seeing me, even when I'm not standing right in front of you. The drive to the lake was quiet, the road familiar, yet strangely new. I passed old landmarks, diners we used to stop at when the kids were little, hiking trails we never had time to walk, and each one stirred something inside me. Regret, nostalgia, longing. When I arrived at the small rental cabin, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window as the sun dipped beneath the treeling. I felt the weight of my own company settle around me, and it didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. I lit a fire in the stone hearth, made myself a cup of tea, and opened a journal I hadn't written in since the kids graduated college. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Who am I now?" The words looked strange, but they didn't scare me. They invited me in. That night, I dreamed not of Tom, not of Gerald, not of my old life, but of color. Vibrant, messy, uncontainable color. I saw myself dancing in a sunlit room, paint on my fingers, laughter in my throat. I didn't recognize the place, but I knew the feeling. It was freedom. The next morning, I stood by the lake's edge, watching the water ripple with early autumn wind. I didn't have answers. I didn't know if Tom and I would make it. But for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of what I didn't know. I was alive in it. I took out my phone and typed a message. "I'm okay. I'll call you tonight. Thank you for listening." I hit send. And just like that, I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I was seen. By him. By the world. By myself. And that, finally, was enough to begin again. Looking back on everything, I realized this journey wasn't just about my marriage. It was about me finding the courage to wake up in the middle of my own life and ask, am I still here? For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, that love meant self-sacrifice. But the truth is, growing older doesn't mean fading away. It means we've earned the right to rediscover ourselves, not just as spouses, parents, or caretakers, but as people who still dream, still want, still matter. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Never wait for someone else to give you permission to live fully. Whether you're 62 or 82, your voice still matters. Your needs are still real. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Am I happy? Am I seen? And if the answers hurt, don't turn away. Lean in. You are never too old to change, to choose differently, or to begin again. So if you feel invisible, like I once did, let this be your moment. Speak up. Be bold. Go find that version of yourself you tucked away for the sake of others. She's still there, and she's waiting.